evening. Thank you so much for coming today. We know it's been a long week, a long 2 weeks, and a long day again. So we thank you all for the energy and persistence, and to continue the discussion that has been going on for the last 2 weeks on technology and feminism. And we are here at this parallel event to talk about the advantages of technology, but also the challenges that we often face, and the disproportionate threats that this technology often faces, that threats that women face, women activists face in digital spaces, and as a result of these technologies. We will have an intimate discussion, and I'm very excited to have this space where we will all reflect together and take some time to have a discussion with Hajer, Shareif, and with Rasha Jarhum, moderated by Sherine Tadros, and it's going to be, I think, a really nice discussion, and I hope that we can all engage and discuss together. I'm Salma Kahale. I'm the MENA Program Director at the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and I'm really honored to introduce the discussion featuring some of the most inspirational women activists in the region that I know. All the rapid technological advancements over the past decades have been drastically changing the way we live, the way we work, and advocate for our rights. Technology has proven to be a vital source and a powerful tool for women activists in conflict contexts, allowing them to engage in peace building, participate in revolutions, and mobilize attention and accountability. Yet, technology has also come with a hefty price, exacerbating the threats and risks that women and feminist activists are disproportionately subject to. We're delighted to have the opportunity to be with you in person in New York at the CSW67 and to share the insights and experiences of women activists from the MENA region. Today's conversation will touch upon some of the advantages of technology, including facilitating women's engagement in previously restricted spaces, how it amplifies women's voices and provides virtual convening spaces to exchange knowledge and voice collective demands, as well as the disproportionate threats facing women activists in digital spaces. With us today on the panel, as I mentioned, is Rasha Jarhum. She's a Yemeni human rights defender and founder and director of the Peace Track initiative, Moderator, which promotes peace building in Yemen and MENA region through amplifying voices of women, youth, and civil society organizations. We also have Hajer Shareif, who's a Libyan peace and human rights activist. She's the co-founder and is currently co-leading the work of Together We Build It, Ma'an Nabniha, a nonprofit organization working to promote peace and security in Libya. Originally meant to be here with us was Hayma Al-Yousfi, who's a Syrian peace and human rights activist currently based in Turkey, who was personally affected in the earthquake in February, and who sadly wasn't granted a US visa to join us in person today. She is the general program manager at the Syrian Feminist Journalist Network, شبكة الصحفيات السوريات, which builds bridges between media and the Syrian women's movement through capacity building, gender equality, and justice. She recorded her intervention in a video that we will play near the end of the session. And thankfully, with the way we have managed to manage technology today, we will be able to play that video. We're also honored to have with us Sherine Tadros, who will be moderating this discussion. Sherine is the Deputy Director of Advocacy and UN Representative for Amnesty International, where she leads a team of senior advocates to lobby for the protection and promotion of human rights around the world. Thank you so much for joining us, and over to you, Sherine.
Thank you so much. What an honor it is to be amongst these incredible women. They inspire me truly on a daily basis, and I'm really glad and excited about this conversation because, quite honestly, it's very close to my heart. As a journalist in 2011, I was working for Al Jazeera English and I covered uprisings in Libya and in Yemen and in Egypt. And without the use of social media, for me and many of my female colleagues especially, those 2 minutes that your editor gives you to report the story was simply not enough. But through the use of Twitter and other social media, we were able to provide a lot more context and give more voices to the voiceless. And so it turned out to be such an important and great tool for us. On the other side, though, I also witnessed shortly after the ouster of some of these leaders, the kind of crackdown that governments had on those who were using social media, people who are still in prison today for tweeting and for daring to question the narrative of the governments that they lived under. And so there is a sharp edge to the use of technology. And so it's a very nuanced and difficult subject, but one that I think is so important and one that I think is extremely relevant. And I wanted to start with that, with taking us back to 2011 and ask both of you, perhaps I'll start with you, Rasha, about 2011 and how that changed, the use of technology, especially for women, changed, and whether that was seen as an advantage or disadvantage.
Thank you, Sherine. You took me back to a moment. At the time, I was in a job that required me to be apolitical, but I couldn't be apolitical. So I actually participated in supporting the uprising, and we used social media as a main platform to mobilize and to share the information. Of course, government restricted sharing information. They shut down the internet, they slowed it down. And platforms like Twitter, for example, was very important during the uprising. And we actually, when they cut down the internet, we used to send tweets into a phone number, international, and it went into our feed on the Twitter. So we paid for that service, but it was something that's important to make sure that our voices are being reached internationally. Facebook was also used hugely, specifically to organize and coordinate the mobilization and the demonstrations, locations. We had the Facebook tent in the square of the demonstration, calling for liberty. And so I think I remember one day I invited women's human rights defenders to educate them on how to use Facebook and Twitter, because it was a skill, still like new skill that was basically introduced. And I hosted them in my house. My house was like this is the building, and that building is like the security building. So if they had, they would know that we were doing that next to them. It was extremely risky. We received a lot of threats. They monitored our phones. I had threats that I received on the phone. Our movement was also monitored, but it was, for us, it was very important to contribute and to change the regime. Although now I regret it, but but that was what we felt at the moment. Thank you.
Can I follow it up with asking about the particular experience of women, right? The fact that when you're tweeting, when you're putting on Facebook, you can, of course, use your name and your picture and so on, but you could also call yourself Yemen Freedom and have a picture, a flag. How did it make a difference for women, especially, to be able to have this kind of platform?
Actually, that's a good point. I didn't use my name, and it was anonymous. I had a different name that I will not reveal in this. But that was how we mobilized. And actually, the women had better accessibility. They were able to fundraise. They were able to mobilize resources to fund the square where the demonstrators were gathering. We sent them aid. We sent them food. We had women going to clean the square. My sister was actually sweeping the square. I had my other sister was delivering speeches to mobilize people. So it was generally the women participated, and this changed the stereotypes about Yemeni women because they are viewed that they don't go to the public. Actually, President Saleh was saying, "Oh, the women are mixing with men," and it was to shame the women and to keep them at home. But the women continued to be in the front, and that actually leading the uprising earned them the right to participate in the national dialogue that followed. So we were able to secure 28% in the national dialogue, and the quota was 30%. And it was one of the outcomes of the national dialogue is to actually have women's participation in all the state levels by 30%.
Thank you. Incredible. So it opened a door in many ways. Was it the same with you?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at 2011, the most well-known month or date is February, but what was going on in preparation was before that. It was since January, and now when Russia is having you're remembering those days. It's very interesting to think about them, because in 2011 I was 18 at the time, and I remember me and my best friend. We were studying at the university, right? And that was like our first year at the university. And we were like so pro change. We were like so pro the revolution. And we started having this like very under the table conversations at the university when the revolution started in Tunis. And that started with one question: would it ever happen in Libya? Like, we were still at the time where you cannot even dream about it. And I remember within our group of friends, me and my best friends were the only one who wanted to talk about this. We were like, would it ever happen? What would we do if it happens? How will it be? And the majority of our other friends, understandably, because also the university was highly monitored and there was, security around that you think they are students, but they end up not being students, and you're like, why there are people who've been here for 7 years still in the first year, right? Taking a first year class, and you're like, oh, okay. But I remember me and her within this group of friends, we drew, so we have the regime flag, which is green, and then we had the previous flag for the Libyan state, which is like different colors. And I remember me and her, we drew like, we opened, like a PowerPoint sort of thing, and we drew the revolution flag, even before it was like fully announced. And we posted it as our profile photo, and that was in 2011. So this is like end of January 2011. And it's so funny to think about it now, because we thought we were like revolutionaries by just doing that, like just changing a profile picture, right? Like, look at what we're doing. And then all of our friends were like, okay, stop, like you're taking it too far. And with Facebook, they sort of bring back the memories, right? Like, if you go to your Facebook now and they're like, do you want to see your memory from 10 years ago or 12 years ago? And we just saw that like last month. And when I was looking at the comments, like what we were saying, and our friends are like, okay, you need to stop this, or like take this down, and we're like, no, we're gonna keep it, because it was really like sort of this space where you could express yourself, because at the time, like, you cannot do that in the street. So the digital space allowed that to happen. Interestingly, it allowed you to dream about the possibility of it happening, even without knowing whether it will happen or not. But, like, I grew up in a country where everyone around me, whenever there is a talk about politics, it has to be like whispered, and we were told, listen, don't criticize, don't engage, even at school. Like, I remember I've been also taught to like say, I don't talk about politics, so like I don't say what my parents are saying about the regime in class and in school. So then like that space, this digital space, really gave us the freedom to feel it, like just posting that photo, changing the profile photo. I know it sounds nothing today, but at the time it meant a lot, because it meant that you can express yourself and your political views. it was a good time at the moment.
Yeah, I'm sorry to bring back the trauma because we all know what happens next. But yeah, I mean, so you have these big moments, right? Like revolutions, which and uprisings that create this kind of momentum, and then with social media, you can promote and mobilize and so on. What about in more complex situations, like you have in Yemen? And especially protracted conflicts like we have now in Yemen, many years after the war, during a war. And so in those kind of complex situations, how is the use of technology in general, but social media, how is it used by women, both in terms of, how they experience humanitarian situation and so on, but also in terms of peace building, which I know you're so a big part of?
Well, actually, as you said, Sherine, we use the digital platforms to build coalitions. For example, we established the Women's Solidarity Network, which has around 330 women leaders inside and outside Yemen, who are peace builders working at the ground, doing different peace community initiatives, including ending child recruitment, delivering aid in very difficult terrains. We have a member that I remember very clearly who used to go to Tadros, where it is besieged. There were trapped families. She will navigate on mines to reach families, bring them food, or try to evacuate them. We had women doing mediation over water and land conflicts. So we did not have an office. It was all women coming together on WhatsApp. We had now a web page that we have established. It's not, until today, it's not a registered initiative. It's just a coalition of women coming together to support each other and also to protect each other, because the protection system in Yemen collapsed. It was very limited before the war, but completely collapsed now during the war. There's nothing. We have only 4 shelters for women domestic survivors, and they just don't allow, for example, we have a lot of detainees, women detainees. If she is released, she's gonna face first challenges to be released. She needs a guardian, male guardian, to receive her, and then her family might welcome or not welcome her. They might be they might even beat her, her brothers. And then if she survives, her family, the community criticize her. And then if she wants to go to a shelter, she's not welcome, because the criteria does not allow women who've been to prison to access shelter services. So in the Peace Track initiative, our organization, we established a protection program to support women, human rights defenders and peace builders, and those who were detained and released, to do relocation grants for them and to support them on legal aid and psychological support, basically trying to do comprehensive services, but with very limited resources, because unfortunately all the funds in Yemen are focused on humanitarian aid, and this kind of services get ignored, or there are not enough resources. In terms of the peace process, we worked with women leaders inside and outside the country to draft the feminist peace roadmap. This is a strategic guiding framework on peace for mediators and negotiators. It has our demands as women. We consulted 1,000 people. 73% of them are women and the rest are men. And we included political parties, local communities, women affected by the war, mothers of abductees, women how their children went to be fighters, in order to make sure that this peace roadmap is a responsive, it has recommendations with ideas to respond to the needs of the people. And we, of course, shared that with the UN Envoy Office. We influenced the intra-Yemeni talks that were sponsored by the Gulf Cooperation Council. And a lot of the outcomes in actually the intra-Yemeni talks were resonating with the feminist peace roadmap. One of the impact was basically our demand to lift the guardianship laws, And it was followed by a group of women and men who advocated for passports without guardianship. That was the name of the campaign. And the government actually responded and lifted the conditions. But this is the government side, not the Houthi-controlled areas. And so that was good that they responded, but also the women leaders who led this campaign were targeted. They were targeted viciously online through writing about them on websites, and basically, let me stop here and I can add more, but just to move the conversation along. Yeah.
No, thank you for bringing that up, because we were painting a rosy picture of part of technology, and the second part we're going to pivot to some of the threats and hopefully some of the solutions as well, and the safeguards that need to be put in place. But let me turn to Hajer, because we live in a world right now where you get an email from someone, they go, "Can we meet?" And you usually respond saying, "Sure, in person or online," right? So we've had this proliferation, especially during COVID, where we have these opportunities to join meetings, whether they're hybrid or purely online. We're going to see an example of it today, where someone couldn't be with us physically, and they're going to have a virtual presence, so their voice will be heard in this room. That all sounds really, really good and positive, and especially for women and their participation in decision-making processes. Have you found that in your context?
I think in general one can say that the digital space, technology and innovation did indeed expand the sort of the space for participation, right, and engagement. So if we're gonna discuss this in terms of a premises, is technology and innovation helpful? Did it expand the space? Then indeed it did. Because what this meant, it meant, for an example, if you have a meeting that is taking place in the capital, in Libya, then the women from the different parts of the country, just as an example, right, can participate in this meeting without the need for them to go through all the logistics, which is not easy. Women in the south, where you have the airport being closed for so many years, if they would be forced to attend the meeting in person, or if the choice whether they attend the meeting in person or not attend at all, then imagine those women will have to drive over perhaps 700 kilometers all the way to the capital, right? And then you have the same thing with women from the other areas. So in terms of expanding participation, it did. But also in the same time, which is something that is very interesting, where you have a country like Libya, where because of the political situation, sometimes it's extremely difficult security-wise to have a meeting inside of Libya where all Libyans from different factions and groups can attend because of the security concerns, right? So then the online space becomes an alternative. So as a premises, it is good, and it managed to expand participation and engagement. But then on the other hand, I'm always very cautious to say but when we're talking about this, because my fear is that the use of technology and innovation becomes more or less a very simplified way of engagement, right? Where it's easy for a decision maker to join a Zoom call for an hour, have hundreds of women joining, and then use that number as to say, I consulted with 500 women. You cannot consult with 500 women over an hour over a Zoom call. You cannot do that. You engaged, maybe? You've been around 500 women. You've been in the online presence of 500 women, but there is no way to say I consulted or I took the views of 500 women. So that is a fear on my end. As I said, I'm very cautious to always say the but, not because I'm pessimistic or I'm against the use of technology and innovation. I'm for it 100%, but we just need to be aware of when to use it and what purpose to use it for. And perhaps instead of inviting, 500 women to a Zoom call, invite 10 women to a Zoom call where each woman can actually have an enough space and time to talk, to have a one-on-one conversation with the decision maker, or if this was a consultation, right? But as I said, what what I'm afraid about is that the use of technology and innovation, especially in the mediation space, the peace building space, will become more and more systemized, where at some point it's going to perhaps end up to being a survey that someone has to fill, and then this will be labeled as engagement and consultation. So if we're gonna go to the online space, which we should use it in a hybrid form to ensure that people are and women are able to participate, because it's good, it is good for a woman to be able to join a meeting while she is at her home, because women also have so many other duties in case some people do not know, alongside the work they do. So it is great to enable them to participate in a public space in a way that is convenient for them. But just please, let's be critical and let's be honest about what that engagement is,
Thank you. I think that's such a great point about the difference between participation and meaningful participation. And there's so much box ticking, I think, when it comes to this issue of women's participation. And there's this situation here at the UN often where it really is purely box ticking, of making sure you have one woman on a panel, making sure you have one woman in the room, and it doesn't really matter which women, just ask one woman to be there. And it's a very superficial way of looking at the, I guess, the strengths that you bring from having a woman at the table, and that's really something to watch out for. Apart from the sort of box ticking and non-meaningful participation issue, there's other issues and threats and risks to this technology, for women especially. I know, Rasha, that you've had your own experience with online threats and you've known other women and helped them through that. Could you share any of your experiences with us, and also, anything you think would be useful to share about how you mitigate some of those risks and threats?
Thank you, Sherine. And I couldn't agree more with Hajer. We share the same situation about the peace consultations online. For the threats, unfortunately, the technology is a double-edged sword. While it has give us the space to really claim the space and take lead in the peace process as feminist organizations, and they had doubts as well. They always doubted our innovative ways in using technology to work on peace process. But when COVID hit and everybody used technology and online digital tools, they were like, oh, it works. You can actually do the job through innovative and digital tools. Now, the negative part is that you get attacked. The time that I was part of the peace process in 2016, and the UN envoy invited 7 women leaders to go support the peace talks in Kuwait, Yemen peace talks, there was a fire of social media that had both positive and negative connotations about us. And it was like, first they discredit us, they use really horrific words. They don't only attack me, they attack my husband, they attack my family. And so that was for me the first shock, actually, that I was being attacked that way. And it was a bit demotivating. But with time and the attacks, you grow the thick skin. And you start to find ways how to react. These tactics continued. There is always character assassination tactics against women political leaders and human rights defenders. There is also ways to steal your data and use it against you. We had cases of women-led organizations. The woman chairperson, her phone was hacked. And in Yemen, if the photos are leaked, they threaten to share her photos, for example, with her family. It was really going bad. We had the situation with a woman who took her life. She's okay, but she tried to kill herself because also they blackmailed her like this with information. And so it has a real impact. It's on social media, but it has physical impact on the woman. and it really paralyzed them. There is a lot of women who stopped working in the public space because of these attacks. And so for us, what we try to do, first you use the reporting mechanisms that exist in the different social platforms. In WhatsApp, you can actually report a message if it's inappropriate. You can just report it. And Facebook and Twitter, the same. But they usually don't do anything. This is the fact. The protection policies of social media still don't understand the context, still don't understand what protection means for women in our society, and so they are backwards. We need to really revolutionize the protection policies of social platforms. The other thing is there were some paid services that would, for example, tell you what is the IP address, where is it generated. It will give you an idea whether it is a state-led, because sometimes the states themselves attack the human rights defenders, and sometimes it was non-state armed groups who were attacking and doing this kind of attacks. So it provides you with the one of the things that really we benefited from was there is organizations providing 24-hour service of digital support. It's called accessnow.org, and if anyone faces, they help as much as they can. But again, it's not like because of the policies of the platforms, they can't go that far. They will help you secure your phone if it got hacked. They will help you protect your digital data. But sometimes if the harm has already done, it becomes so hard to reverse it.
I want to get to some of these safeguards that exist and whose responsibility you think it is in the next round. But I really want to echo what you said about the inadequacy of social media platforms. I also myself experienced no less than a year and a half of total harassment by the same person, and because you're on television, they know where you are, and so they would message me saying, I can see that you're in the square on the right side and I'm coming, and I would report this over and over again to Twitter, and they would say, sorry, this has not, and it's automated response, and you never got to speak to a person. I'm sorry, this does not reach the threshold, and I mean, you why don't you just block the person? And you're thinking, well, I could block them, but I also want to know if they're getting too close to me or my family. So it was really terrorizing, actually, and they were so inadequate, this response. So I hope it's gotten better from my day, because we're talking about 5-6 years ago where this sort of thing was happening. But I'm wondering if these kinds of threats, and they're very real and very serious, do you think that they put women off participating?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, we do see that there is a shift for women participating in public life, where now you find more and more women who would say, okay, I want to participate in this, but I don't want my photo to be taken. I don't want to be on video. Asking questions, is this recorded or not? Is this live or not? While before, that these were never the question, because even the women understood that with the social media platforms, with the digital space, this gives them even more outreach. This amplifies their messages, right? Because instead of talking to one person, you're actually talking to many people. There is a potential that what you're saying is going to resonate with others beyond this, people you're talking to in person. But now, because women also know that if they go online, then they are on their own. It's unfortunate, but this is the reality. Like, if you decide to go online, then you're sort of put in a corner where you're sort of blamed also for going online. Even if you post your picture online and someone take it, misuse it, and do whatever they want with it, you're still the one who's going to be blamed. And I think we need to start talking about the fact that the technicalities, for me, it doesn't matter when it comes to copyrights and whatever, but at the end of the day, it is your photo, it is you there, and in specific countries, in specific contexts, that matters, right? And what Rasha said, it's exactly the same in Libya as well. Most recently, there was a campaign that was launched against the Libyan woman, a public figure, who was actually nominated for an ambassador position. And she didn't get the position. They had to pull her file away because of the backlash that happened. And it wasn't a backlash based on merits, it wasn't that this woman is not qualified because 1, 2, 3. It was a backlash where, for some reason, they managed to get intimate photos of her in her own home, in home clothes, and, and like women really thinking that she's safe in her own space. Photos of her from her kitchen, and that was circulating all over Facebook with people saying, one of the photos that I personally reported, it actually had some parts of her body circled in red. So it's obvious that this is a photo that does not look right. There is something wrong about it. And when I reported it with other women as well, because we wanted to rally behind this woman and find a way to stop these photos from circling, we all got the automated response that we checked the photo, it does not violate our community guidelines. And you're like, whoever checked this photo does not understand the context. But hold on a second, there are red circles on a woman's body. There's no way you can tell me, you can be living in space. There's no way you can tell me this is fine. This is obvious a photo that is used for a specific purpose, right? So technology platforms, social media platforms, they need to do better. You mentioned that there are, for example, organizations and groups that you can reach out to help. But it shouldn't be like that, like a woman who is online should be able to have some ownership, to have some control on her image, right? If there is a photo of you circulating around, obviously threatening, then you should be able to stop it yourself by self-reporting. You don't need to go through intermediaries, right? How do you know about these intermediaries? Like, I know they exist, but for example, I've been in this space for so long, it's the first time I hear about access support. And I'm someone who's been around for 12 years now. So there should be a way for women to do it themselves and not necessarily through a third party who would, I'm sure they are wonderful and they do help, but there should be a way for us to do it ourselves when we need to do it.
Sorry. That's a good point, Hajer. The reason they're not very well known, it's because they get targeted from states. But it's also, I think, our mistake as human rights defenders. Now we are working as Peace Track Initiative on a self-referral guide for human rights defenders. It will actually have like all the services that you can use for different things, whether grants, whether digital security protection, everything. But it's going to also be an internal guide because we don't want the state or non-armed groups to know about it. So, but you are very right. And how I knew about it, it was by chance. I had my brother-in-law, he came to visit me and he was in a conference and he gave me the brochure. That's how it was. Like, it was not even my space to be, it was an IT thing.
Just thank you for that point. I guess, like, where does the responsibility lie? Like, you're saying that I should be able to have ownership over my picture. But what does that actually entail? Like, does it entail the social media platform that we are operating in giving me that power, or is it the government who then legislate so that I have a right to tell the social media companies or platforms you're breaking the law? Where does responsibility lie, and therefore where do we need to be targeting our efforts to say that this is an issue?
That's a very good question. I mean, when it comes to the international frameworks, I think we have enough that is established. We have the international framework that would put the responsibility to protect human rights on states, and we have an international framework that does put the responsibility on private companies like social media platforms of some size to respect human rights. So the simple answer for that is both. it's the states, but also it's the social media platforms, it's the digital companies. They should understand that these, as we kept referring to real, these are real things. It's not only about the online space as a space for marketing and business innovation and making money and so on. The online space is where people exist, is where some people have parts of their lives online, right? And what happens in the online space directly translates to the physical space. When you see that there are threats that are made online, then it's very hard to say, well, that platform does not have a responsibility to safeguard. And of course, they do have policies to some extent, they do have mechanisms to some extent, but are they sufficient? Are they sufficient for self-use? Because this is important. But then, are they context specific? Because we were having a conversation yesterday, me and Ola, and I'm talking about Libya, she's talking about Syria, and there is different contexts, especially when it comes to the social norms, the understanding. Maybe what is fine in Syria is not necessarily okay in Libya. So there is a need for these platforms to have reporting mechanisms, but safeguarding mechanisms that not only understand the MENA region or a specific region, they need to understand when a word is used, what does that mean in Libya? Not what it means in Arabic, because it could be fine in one country, but in Libya, it could be detrimental. So they really need to understand what these words mean, what this image of red circles around, what does this symbol mean in the context where the person exists, where the woman exists. And whose responsibility is that? Again, the responsibility to protect is on the state, but the social media platforms, the digital space, they do have a responsibility to respect the human rights of women, and based on that, they have to do more for sure.
Right, it sounds like they have to invest, and that was the problem with Facebook, for example, with the Rohingya crisis and all the hatred that spread about the Rohingya people before the latest round of violence, and the idea was that Facebook was promoting was being used as a platform to spread this hatred, but they didn't have an office or anyone who spoke the language, so they didn't take it down. And then, it took a further, I don't know how long for them to open up an office. And then we hear now that these tech companies, whether under Elon Musk or whatever, are cutting down on staff and actually, when it comes to Twitter, totally killing off their entire human rights team. So it kind of feels like we're going in the wrong direction. You found ways to sort of, almost plaster over it, find workarounds to this. But where do you think the responsibility lies, and what should we in this room be doing?
So for us and the Peace Track Initiative, one of the things that we do is actually we provide the women we work with logistical grants that include if they need to buy laptops, phones, internet, cover their internet subscription. In Yemen, internet is sold in the black market in really crazy prices. So we try to cover that for them as well. But because I feel like accessibility is level 1. Level 2 is actually to provide digital training and digital safety training to the women. So it's part of our feminist leadership program that they need to go through the digital feminist training. And we do that in partnership with organizations who have lead in this work. For organizations such as Access Now, Citizen Lab, there is a number of organizations that provide these kind of services, and forensic, because forensic digital investigation, they have connection with the platforms. They have a faster access to Facebook, Twitter, to nudge them to do an action. We will report, the report will be sad, but if we also use them, we kind of get a slightly better response, usually. Another point that I wanted to say is actually on hate speech. As Hajer said, there is a lot of words that mean differently in different contexts, but we did a mapping of hate speech in Yemen, the political hate speech, but also there is religious speech against women. There is also like political hate speech in general. So we did a mapping of that, and unfortunately, some conservative Facebook pages that uses religious speech in the name of protecting freedoms, religious freedoms, is kept. And like they target me by name in their posts and my picture, and that I'm promoting things that are not in with Islam and everything. And when you report, you always unfortunately get a negative response. But with enough mobilizing a lot of people to report a post, it can actually support removing the post. But you need an electronic army of feminists to support you. And this has been also a struggle because the women are very stretched, and it is such a consuming process. So we're trying in all directions, but we do need the multi-corporations, international corporations, to take more responsibility, to use human rights defenders as reference. Just make us advisors, like ask us the question, is this okay or not? And we can give them better answers. So they need to improve their policies, basically protection policies, and they need to work very closely with women in the different countries to understand protection better.
That's great. So, I mean, at least we sort of identified almost that there are these resources available. There are human rights defenders and women human rights defenders, especially, who know what these safeguards should be and how to defend against it. It really comes down to political will on the state side, but also on the business and these platform side as well, to want to reach out and want to be better. And sometimes it needs a push from all of us here to try and tell them that they must do better. So let's try and do that together. We now want to hear from Hayma, who, as you heard at the start, was meant to join us, but unfortunately wasn't granted a US visa. She's a Syrian activist. We've spoken many times, and she is someone who feels very passionately about this subject. And her video right now is from Turkey, where she's based. And we really discussed a lot of these issues with her to do with the advantages, disadvantages, threats, and so on of the digital space for women. So I will let you hear from her, and then we'll take 2 or 3 questions.
Hello everyone, I'm Hayma Al-Yousfi, a Syrian feminist and human rights activist. I work as the General Program Manager with the Syrian Female Journalist Network, SFJN. I want to start with expressing my deepest condolences to everyone who lost family members, friends and loved ones due to the earthquake that hit Turkey and Syria on February 6th. I wish a speedy recovery to the injured and a sense of safety and stability to everyone who was displaced. I myself lived in Gaziantep and am currently in Ankara as my house was affected. I couldn't join you in person as a Syrian citizen who couldn't get the US visa. Social media platforms and the digital space played a great role in the Syrian revolution in mobilizing communities, coordinating and organizing protests and activities, in amplifying our voices, advocating for our rights, and also in documenting human rights violations happening in Syria. As women who experience many threats and limitations related to our travel and movement, it also opened opportunities for us to participate and be present in the public discussions and the political sphere. After COVID-19 and the lockdown measures and the switch to online meetings, it also helped us participate in the conferences and meetings at international level who we couldn't reach before due to travel restrictions and the visa complications, and also to communicate with the Syrian women and the communities inside Syria who also didn't have the opportunity to join trainings and meetings before. However, many Syrian women consider the digital space unsafe as it is chaotic and unregulated and unfair due to the impunity enjoyed by perpetrators of digital violence who are not held accountable. SFJN produced a report called Digital Safety is a Right that focuses on digital violence targeting Syrian women journalists and human rights defenders. It highlights the forms of digital violence that they experience And also it concludes to a set of recommendations to local media organizations, international donors, and social media platforms. 58% of women participating in the study addressed that the digital attacks that they experience affected their willingness to express themselves and their thoughts and ideas, and caused their withdrawal from public space. They also addressed the physical and mental state when they face a digital attack and its impacts on them. According to women participants in the study, anxiety, sadness, depression, and anger dominate during and after a digital attack. These feelings also develop to tangible physical symptoms such as shortness of breath, headaches and migraines, dizziness, and fatigue. Many women also addressed that these digital attacks caused them to close their social media platforms, withdraw from public space, be isolated and not able to communicate with others for several months. And sadly, some of the participants addressed that they thought of committing suicide. After the earthquake, many women, including journalists and activists, lost their mobile phones, laptops, and hard drives under the rubble. And it was reported by specialists and digital safety organizations that some personal information, including photos and videos, were used to blackmail and threaten these women. So it's very important to raise awareness about digital security and to provide regular trainings not only to organizations and official bodies, but also to independent journalists and activists. It's also important to address protection with a holistic approach, where we look into the impacts on physical, psychological, and mental levels, and pay attention to the professional and material loss of these activists and journalists, and also to the psychological toll, so we provide professional psychological support. For social media platforms, it's important to consider the region's different languages and dialects, in addition to the social and political contexts. It's important to dedicate different regional offices instead of one office dedicated to the whole Arabic-speaking region, to ensure fast, more effective response, and to prioritize handling cases of harassment and violence against marginalized and vulnerable groups. It's also very important to ensure human oversight over the AI-powered content moderation. Thank you.
So we'll take all your questions now. If you have one, please just put up your hand. I'll give you the microphone so that we can also translate what you're saying. But feel free.
Thank you. It's always inspiring to listen to you, Hajer and Rasha. It's also inspiring to listen to you, Sherine, and all the inspirations that you have made with your courageous coverage in Palestine and elsewhere. We've listened a lot about, various ways of mitigating risk when it comes to cyber attacks and so on. Yeah. Okay. But I'm wondering, maybe beyond the political will and beyond, all the support that is related to, providing feminist digital security trainings, etc. What are the things that we could do as a feminist movement, as a collective, to actually prevent these attacks and, handle it and deal with it?
Thank you. Great question. Maybe we'll take you and then.
So I would like to go back to the point where my colleague Rasha had mentioned. We recently had a digital safety and security training. And the first thing she mentioned that most civil society organizations mistake in campaigning for women that are attacked or targeted, or in campaigning for feminist movements, is that we usually amplify the wrong messages. And we amplify the attacks instead of shifting from the perpetrator's narrative to a positive narrative that amplifies the the real story of the victim or the survivor. And we found this very interesting because we tend to just take our phones and retweet. We sometimes create our own perspective, we share our own opinions, but still retweeting, reposting is something that at that moment contributes to the danger and the risks of the victim. So she told us that one of the best ways is actually to privatize, to self-censor, to help the person unless, of course, otherwise consented, that we need to not be as active as civil society organizations. And I thought that was actually a very interesting point of view from a digital safety and security expert, because we do the complete opposite. I also have one other point, because Rasha also mentioned about this electronic armies. In 2021, I think, when Clubhouse first started, and that's actually where I met my colleagues at Peace Track Initiative, and that's how we bonded. Me and a couple of colleagues of mine, we founded the Women's Safety Network, which is literally an electronic army where we all joined up. We created a Slack, a WhatsApp, and an Instagram. We did something now what we call cancel culture, and that's actually also very negative, because you don't go through the credibility process of understanding what actually happened. You just cancel directly. I would like to hear your points about that, and as civil society, especially in Libya. I know the case of Yemen, but in your case as well, what would be the case? Do you agree on these terms, like especially in terms of the cancel culture or the idea of not engaging at all with perpetrators until things settle, and then picking up again and addressing the issue as per the wishes of the victim or the survivor?
Yeah, there was one there.
Hi, thank you very much for your input. My name is Michelle, and I have two questions. Firstly, what kind of mechanisms do you recommend to hold the governments accountable in order to provide the protection that you talked about specifically? Do you think that, for example, also the National Action Plans of Women, Peace and Security, I know that there is one for sure in Yemen, is a means? I mean, they don't really address technology normally, but maybe that's an avenue, or would you say that's not a space at all? It's not a space created by civil society as well. And then for the second question, I was wondering, what would be your specific recommendations now that negotiations are ongoing at the CSW? You know, they talk about technology facilitated gender-based violence, for example, but also other aspects. But it's often about accessibility, but what about protection? What are your demands for these negotiations? Thank you.
Thanks. And there's one last question here.
Do you find sometimes that the feminists are not genuine in their feminism action? And now that we are so driven by the likes, that we tend to say the things that are going to be creating more following instead of talking about the reality and the truth? And how does the artificial intelligence on social media affect our voices as women? I've noticed that most of the time now we are more liberated to speak, but we are not allowed to speak the truth. We gotta talk about topical questions and things that are more acceptable in the society. For instance, I'm from South Africa, and when I spoke about the gender-based violence I faced in radiation oncology, post-apartheid, 20 years post-apartheid, where I still experience apartheid, it was not a topical topic because everybody has agreed that, Nelson Mandela has set us free, so there's no more apartheid. The apartheid is ended. There's no more racism. There's unity. We are all one. Yet my professor was still calling me a monkey. Yet I was assaulted in the hospital corridors and dragged on the hospital floor. And nobody was interested in helping in that situation. So are the feminists really feminists? That's my question.
أقوم بطرح سؤال باللغة العربية. طبعا في بداية هذه الندوة تم التطرق للربيع العربي والليبي ودور التكنولوجيا والسوشيال ميديا في رفع الوعي السياسي خلال هذه الفترة. سؤالي خلال عملية السلام في ليبيا وفي اليمن وخلال الحوارات الوطنية تم التطرق لدور الإعلام وتم طرح توصيات لمخرجات الحوار الوطني اليمني وأعتقد نفس الشيء بالنسبة للحوار الوطني الليبي. هل برأيك التوصيات التي تم طرحها كافية؟ هل هي قابلة للتطبيق؟ وما هي سبل تطويرها أو دعمها؟ شكرا.
Spring and about global technology and social media and all the political awareness that came after that. I would like to have a question about the peace process in Yemen and Libya and about the national dialogue in Yemen and Libya. Is it enough? What's being proposed? Are the recommendations applicable? Are they enough? And are they capable of being developed further?
Okay, so who wants to go first? Rasha, would you like to give it a go first?
Okay, for Ola's question, I don't know what we can do. We have used everything that we can use. And to answer about what the governments can do and how we hold them accountable. In Yemen, we don't even have laws to protect us from digital crimes and cyber crimes. And even there is a lot of violations in international humanitarian law that are not criminalized in Yemen, in our penal code. So we have a huge gap for protecting women specifically in legal protection. The other thing is for the National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security, it has some gaps, but we need to support it. That's what we keep saying. It doesn't include digital security or digital threats. It barely touches upon what the women need, and there is many gaps. It doesn't mention women human rights defenders. So we're still a long way to improve it and review it and have the civil society voice and recommendations reflected in it. But we are working on that, just to assure you. As I advise, it depends on case by case. Sometimes you flee the situation on social media, sometimes you need to respond and you need to react. And when the person is a known person who is attacking, you need to have a known person reacting. Because an example of that is Dr. Ulfat al-Tubai, and someone said that people get attacked when they are nominated for political posts. So she was going to be holding an important political position, and before that there was a character assassination attempt on her because of her role of supporting lifting the guardianship on the passports conditions. And what she did, she reacted, because the person who attacked her, he wrote an article with a lot of misinformation, misleading information, and she decided to take him to court. She actually took him to court in 3 locations because he kept moving around and she had to follow him, and she allocated a lot of time to do that, and we supported her. But if it was me, I wouldn't do that because it distracted her. Like, you have selective energy. How you spend that energy, I would rather use it to do the work that we do, but not spend it chasing a perpetrator. I have tried that before and I stopped at some point, but she has the will to continue, and he was called to court and we supported her all the way, but we missed her in the strategic work that we do. We needed her to provide us with information, recommendations, and she was not available for us to do that. Almost, because now he has to go to court. Almost, she's gonna win it. Inshallah, she will. In terms of if we are feminist, a genuine feminist, frankly, it's for me feminism is a process. I keep catching myself having perceptions or thinking even racist thoughts that come to mind. Not very, but sometimes my kids, for example, are like, "This is sexist, mom." This is like they correct me. So it's a process. We can't say we are fully feminist and yay. No, we're not perfect, but we're trying to be as much as possible. For the media role, so one of the intra-Yemeni talks that happened in Riyadh last year, actually they brought like 200, I think, journalists, and they discussed and they come up with a code of conduct for journalism work. This is like for us a foundation to start reducing hate speech, to start having a media that is responsible. So for the media role, that's where we are. But there were only 5 women from the 200 men.
Wow. Thank you so much, Rasha. That was probably the most honest intervention that the UN building area has ever seen. So I really appreciate it. Hajer, of course.
Thank you for the questions and comments, because I think that's why we're here, right? To discuss this and reflect. I must say now I'm more worried than when I entered the room because of a pattern that I'm noticing. I'm noticing the way we are forced to respond. I don't want to say our interventions or our response. I want to emphasize the way we are forced to respond is sort of taking us to a place where in cases of sexual violence, gender-based violence, physical ones, where women were told, go and get self-defense classes to survive, where the responsibility to actually be safe and sound, I don't know who thought about that, but for some reason really managed to tell women to go and get self-defense classes instead of stopping it from happening. But then, the self-defense classes pattern or notion, but then there is also, when I hear, the online army that we need to build, it's also a little bit of the buddy system as well. Don't walk around the street alone, you have to have someone with you. We are forced to do that. We need to do that at the moment. Because it is important and it is very creative ways to respond because we're smart. We also know how to survive as women and we're able to do it. But I truly hope that while we're doing this, we also make it clear that we're only willing to do it temporarily at this moment. We're going to do it just now because we have to do it, but this is not what we're going to continue doing. We don't want to... I myself, if I'm offered and whenever I'm offered a digital security class, cybersecurity class training, I go for it because yes, I need to have this knowledge. But I also don't want to continue to be put in a place where the responsibility to protect myself, it lays on me. So I need to suddenly be tech savvy in order for me to, have my rights respected. Again, we are forced to respond in this way, and we are smart for doing that, and it's great. But I just want us, while we do this, we just make it clear to everyone, to those who are responsible, that we're only doing this temporarily because you're not doing your job. So while we're doing your job, when are you going to do your job? So to push them to do that, that's one thing. In terms of, we also had occasions where we shut down our social media platforms. We had to do it. We got such an advice, which was very helpful. But it's also sad that we have to do this because we are not only self-censoring, we are taking ourselves from the public space. In many countries, including Libya, Facebook is an important platform for public participation. If you have to be active on Facebook to be public, to participate in the public life. So if we would be forced again, and if we would be given the advice to, shut your social media platforms, don't post, don't do this, then we're taking ourselves out of the public space. To answer, not fully give an answer, but just a thought on what we should do as groups, I think we need to start to develop the notion of technical prevention when it comes to digital spaces. Because now when we're talking about prevention, we're still going towards that a woman need to be self-empowered to be safe online. But what I mean by technical prevention is that the digital spaces, the social media companies should start doing technical prevention, where again, we are able to self-report in a reporting mechanism that actually work, but we also have access to technical safeguarding mechanisms that are simple, that all women would understand how to use, and that are effective. We also need to be honest about what type of violence, online violence is. Someone, you mentioned, I think, the term online facilitated GBV, gender-based violence. You know, like if you hear it, online facilitated gender-based violence, I know this is the terminology that is used, but for somehow it doesn't sound as severe as it actually is in reality, right? So we should also be aware that we shouldn't go around the issue online facilitated. No, it's violence, right? And when someone else comes with such terminologies that at some point becomes technical, it becomes less severe than it actually is, we should also challenge that, right? And not perhaps go with terminologies that, or accept for terminologies that are, make it sound more technical, online facilitated, right? So we should try to push, and this is also part of the answer, perhaps, or to your question. We should collectively push to criminalize online violence as a serious human rights violation. If a woman is facing online violence, it should be as equivalent to a woman being beaten on the streets. There shouldn't be any difference. We need to work collectively towards criminalizing online violence against women and girls. You know, the online space for many regulators will say it's a very difficult space, right? But I think if we should be inspired by a group of people who manage to always be up to date, is the tax authorities. The tax authorities will always, will always find you, will always find a way to tax you. You can be in Honolulu and they're gonna find you, they're gonna really find a way to put we were talking about taxes earlier, find a regulation, a policy, a platform, a mechanism to really get to you, right? And if you see on the business side, it seems that very simply the tax authorities would consider the online space a real space, because if you're generating profit online, you're fully taxable, they don't see a difference. But then when it comes to gender equality and online violence against women, then it's a little bit of a different conversation, because people are like, or the authorities are like, it's a digital space. We don't know how to regulate it. We don't know how to deal with it. You mentioned, and it's a very good point, that they are currently negotiating the recommendations, right? One recommendation would truly be that we need to start talking about criminalizing online violence against women. And they need to understand it's not a matter of physical violence versus online violence and us trying to make the argument it is real violence or not. I think we should collectively just decide and let them know that it is violence. It is a human rights violation for a woman to suffer and experience online violence. And again, it should be as serious as a woman being beaten on the street or being sexually harassed.
Yeah, it's such a great point, so thoughtful. I think by sterilizing the language as well, you then get into this issue of freedom of speech, right? So if it's not very clearly violence, then you can start saying, well, they can say what they want. This is, freedom of speech issue. So that's why as well, it's really important to raise that level of violence is violence. So thank you to both of you. Last comment from both of you in one line to answer the central question: technology and feminism, friend or foe?
frenemies.
Pretty good. Okay, that's a very UN answer as well. Just don't answer.
I mean, I would say the same, but I would also add like a love and hate relationship indeed.
Thank you so much to both of you. It has really been an incredible discussion. I've learned so much from both of you. We have brought up so many different issues, from experiences to threats to safeguards to what needs to be done. I hope that you all feel inspired. Thank you so much to the team that put this together from WILPF for inviting us here and bringing us all together. And making this happen. Thank you to the excellent translation and all the hard work that you did. Fantastic job. And to all of you for being so engaged and willing to stay behind this evening to discuss this topic. It really heartens me to see this kind of interest in this subject. So thank you, everyone.